All right, today we're going to try and decode the mind of one of history's absolute greatest geniuses, a guy who, honestly, seemed to be living in the future. But our story doesn't actually start with him. Nope. It starts with a number.
$40 million. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's how much Bill Gates, yeah, that Bill Gates, paid for something way back in 1994. And no, it wasn't some hot new tech company or a crazy mansion. It was something way older and, a lot more mysterious. That's right. 40 million bucks for a single book. A book that was written 500 years ago. It was basically a collection of notes and sketches, what we now call the Codex Leicester. And this wasn't just any old book. It was said to hold the secrets to the future of science and technology.
So that just begs the question, right? What on earth could be written in a 500-year-old journal that makes it one of the most expensive books ever sold? Seriously, what secrets does it hold? Well, to figure that out, we've got to understand the guy who wrote it. The author, of course, was Leonardo da Vinci. And look, when you hear that name, you probably think painter, right? Mona Lisa, The Last Supper. But he was so much more than that. He was what we call a polymath, which is basically a fancy word for someone who's a master of, well, just about everything.
So what does that actually mean, to be a polymath? It means your brain doesn't live in just one little box. Your expertise just spills out over everything. We're talking art, science, engineering, anatomy, you name it. For Da Vinci, it meant he saw the world in a way that pretty much nobody else could.
Okay, let's just run through some of this because his achievements they're honestly mind-blowing. He drew over 240 anatomical sketches that look almost identical to modern medical scans, and he did it without x-rays. He designed an armored vehicle, basically the world's first tank. He created a map of a city from a bird's eye view that has satellite-level accuracy, and this is centuries before anyone could fly. And speaking of flying, he blueprinted a flying machine 450 years before the first helicopter ever got off the ground. It's just incredible.
People who study him don't just call him smart. They say he had an impossible imagination skill. It's like a superpower. But here's the real question. Was it some kind of magic? Or was it a method? Something we can actually understand?
And that gets us to the heart of what we're talking about today. See, his genius wasn't just some random gift he was born with. It was a process, a repeatable method for turning simple observation into world-changing innovation. So let's break it down. His method really had 3 key steps. First, physical appearance. He would literally document every single detail about whatever he was studying. Next, reaction. He'd watch and note how that thing affected all the other things around it. And finally, number 3, experiment. This is the big one. He would actively test it, mess with it, manipulate it. He didn't just think about stuff. He had to get his hands dirty to really understand the principles. And that right there is the key. For Da Vinci, an idea that just stays in your head is pretty much useless. He famously wrote, "Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Being willing is not enough. We must do." You see, his legendary notebooks, they weren't for thinking. They were for doing. Okay, so we've got his practical step-by-step method. But what about the mindset? What was the engine that was fueling all of this? Because beyond the how-to, Da Vinci had this incredibly powerful set of principles that drove his creativity, and they're principles that we can learn from too. And this right here is a perfect example of his core belief. Everything is connected. To him, understanding the physics of how light and shadow work for a painting wasn't that different from understanding the anatomy of a human body or the physics of an invention. See, art and science, they weren't these separate things. They were just 2 different languages trying to describe the same single reality. He saw the connections that no one else did.
He also had these, mental hacks for thinking better. For instance, when things got really tough, he'd use humor to break the tension and push through. If he was stuck on a problem, he'd just walk away, take a break. He knew that coming back with fresh eyes was the best way to spot the flaws. And get this, he would practice finding similarities between 2 totally random different things. It was like mental gymnastics to train his brain to make those unexpected leaps.
I mean, you have to wonder, right? How did he have the time for all of this? His answer was both simple and, really profound. He said, "Time stays long enough for those who use it." Wow. It wasn't about having more hours in the day. It was about how you choose to use the ones you've got. All right, so if we've looked at his incredible inventions, we've broken down his method, we've even talked about his mindset. But what's the one thing at the very center of it all? What's the single superpower that made everything else possible? Well, according to pretty much everyone who has ever studied his life's work, the thing that separated a mind like his from an ordinary one, it wasn't just raw talent or physical strength or even having the best education. No, it was something much, much more fundamental.
It was curiosity. That's it. A relentless, almost childlike, insatiable hunger to know how things work. Why is the sky blue? How does a bird fly? He didn't just wonder about these things for a second and move on. No, he had this itch to find the answer, and he would not stop until he figured it out. That was the engine for everything.
And that really brings the whole lesson home for us, doesn't it? Da Vinci used his curiosity to bridge the massive gap between what was known and what was possible. So the question he kind of leaves behind for us is, what's the gap you need to bridge in your life, in your work, and how is your curiosity going to help you get across?
Because if there's one ultimate lesson we can take from the life of Leonardo da Vinci, it's a simple, timeless truth. That pursuit of knowledge, the thing that's driven by just pure curiosity, it doesn't wear you out. It fuels you. As he himself put it, learning never exhausts the mind.